His name was Dell. That's all anyone in Halcyon Wells ever bothered to learn. Every night he played the piano at the Silver Garter, and every night they swept him out the back door into the March mud and paid him in a bowl of cold stew. A song a night, they called it. One bowl, gone gray at the edges. He never argued. He wiped his hands clean on a rag before he touched the keys. Always clean, a tramp with a beggar's coat and a rich man's hands. On Saturday the floor was full, better than 50 men, drinking and shouting, and the owner Ambrose Teague stood up on a chair so they could all hear him. "A tramp's a tramp, boys," he said. "Even one with clean hands." And a clerk named Royce Pemberton, in his borrowed silk vest, flicked a 2-bit coin so it landed at Dell's feet, told him to fetch it. Dell kept playing. He didn't even look down. There were 3 things the town never asked about. The coat he would not sell, no matter how cold the winter got. The private waltz he played to an empty room at closing time, soft, for no one. And the way his hands shook every single day at noon when the train whistle crossed the gorge. 3 things. Nobody wondered. Nobody looked closer. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have looked closer, this story is for you. Before we go on, do this one thing. Subscribe and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Tell me where you are, and then come with me back to Colorado, spring of 1878, to a town called Halcyon Wells. He came off a freight car 2 winters ago. That was the whole of what folks knew. No papers, no past, no family that ever wrote. Just a young man, maybe 23, thin as a fence rail, wrapped in a threadbare wool coat the color of wet ash. He walked into the Silver Garter out of the snow, sat down at the piano nobody could keep in tune, and played. And the room went quiet. Grown men set down their glasses. A gambler forgot his hand. When he finished, Teague hired him on the spot, for nothing, which was exactly what Teague liked to pay. 2 winters, and Dell never once raised his voice. He kept the piano tuned with a little wrench he carried in his pocket. He split his stew with the stray dog that slept under the boardwalk, a gray thing with 1 torn ear. He mended his own boots with wire. He asked for nothing and expected less, and in a town of loud men, that made him easy to overlook. A quiet man is a man other men forget to respect. There was one soul who called him by his name. Nora Kilbride. She served the tables and did the saloon laundry, and she was 24, with dark brown hair she wore in a twist and green eyes that had gone tired before their time. Her father had died the winter before, coughing his lungs out in the little room behind the mercantile, and the doctor's bills had come due. Teague had bought them up. He'd folded every dollar into what he called Nora's debt, and he took it out of her wages a nickel at a time, so that no matter how long she worked, the number at the bottom of his ledger never seemed to shrink. She was drowning, and she knew it. But she still called the piano man Dell, and not the tramp, and not Hey You, and when she brought him his cold stew, she set it down gentle, like it was a plate of something worth eating. "Evening, Dell," she'd say. "Evening, Nora," and that was the whole of their friendship, most nights. 2 tired people nodding across a loud room. Teague paid him last, and always least. When the week's coins came out, the barman got his, and the girls got theirs, and the swamper who cleaned the spittoons got his. Then, if there was anything left, and if Teague felt like it, Dell got a few pennies pressed into his palm like an insult wrapped in a favor. And Royce Pemberton made sport of it. Royce worked the assay office and thought that made him gentry. He'd bought a silk vest on credit and taken to calling the piano the orchestra. "Play us a waltz." "Orchestra." He'd holler, and his friends would laugh, and Dell would play a waltz, and none of them ever understood that the joke was on the man who couldn't tell a gift from a servant. One cold night near the end of that first winter, the fire had burned low, and the last drinkers had gone, and Nora found Dell at the piano with his coat pulled tight. There was a long tear along the seam, from shoulder to elbow, letting the cold right through. "That coat's split," she said. "Give it here. I've got needle and thread in the back. I'll close it before you catch your death." And Dell, who never refused anyone anything, refused her. Gentle, but firm. He held the coat closed with one hand. "It's the only thing I came with," he said. That was all. He didn't explain. Nora didn't push, but for just one moment, when he clutched the coat to his chest, she saw the lining pull tight against something. Something small. Something hard, sewn down into the wool near the heart. Not a coin. Not a button. She couldn't have said what. And she didn't think on it, because a girl with her own troubles doesn't go hunting mysteries in a poor man's coat. She let it go. So did he. He never thought on it either. He'd carried it so long he'd forgotten it was there. Remember that. A small, hard thing, sewn near the heart. Nobody in that room knew what it was. Not even the man wearing it. The next week, a drummer came through on the eastbound, a traveling salesman, loud and pink-faced, selling patent tonics and full of city news. He had a Denver paper, and he read from it at the bar to make himself the center of the room. Most of it was the usual, cattle prices. A hanging up north, and then he laughed and read out a piece he called the fairy tale of the week. Listen to this one, boys. The Halcyon Pacific Railroad. You know it. The big line. Old Cornelius Halloran, richest man west of Chicago, says here his whole fortune's about to slip out of the family. There's a trust, $1.4 million, and if he can't produce his lost heir inside 30 days, the whole line passes to some outfit called the Continental Syndicate. And here's the fairy tale part. The heir's a boy, been missing 11 years, vanished back in '67, when a trestle went down at a place called Placer Gorge. They think the child drowned. But old Halloran won't sign him dead. Been hunting for the boy for 11 years. 30 days left, and he's looking for a ghost. The saloon roared. A lost heir, a drowned boy, $1 million floating around out west like a leaf on a creek. What a story. What a rich man's foolishness to chase a dead child for 11 years rather than let the money go. At the piano, Dell stopped playing. Just for a beat. His coffee cup was in his hand, and it rattled against the saucer, once, hard, before he set it down. His face had gone the color of the March sky. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever noticed the piano man. Nora noticed. She was clearing the next table, and she saw his hand shake, and she saw him look at the floor like there was something written there. Placer Gorge. 67. She filed it away, the way you file a thing you don't understand, and she went back to work. That night, Teague sent Dell out hungry. There'd been a scuffle over cards, and Teague was in a black mood. And when the piano man came for his stew, Teague waved him off. "Ate your share in kindling," he said, which made no sense, but Teague was the man with the ledger, so it didn't have to. Dell gathered his coat and went out into the cold, without a word. Nora watched him go. And then she did a thing she couldn't afford. She had 2 bits in her apron, real money, money that should have gone against the mountain of debt with her name on it. She took it, and she ran down the boardwalk after him, and she caught him at the corner where the stray dog waited. "Dell?" "Wait." She was out of breath. "Go to the depot lunchroom. Ma Pruitt's still got the stove lit. Get yourself a real supper. Beef and biscuits and coffee that's hot." She pressed the coins into his hand before he could argue. He looked at the money, and then at her, and something moved behind his eyes that he didn't have words for. Nobody had spent money on him in 11 years. He didn't know that number, but his body did. "Nora, I can't take your. You can and you will. Split it with the dog if you want. But eat something," and she turned and hurried back before he could give it back, because she knew if she stood there, she'd let him. She never knew who she was feeding. Neither did he. A girl with nothing spent her last on a man with less, and thought it was only supper. That's the thing about real kindness. It never checks a man's coat first. The weather warmed, but the town's temper toward the piano man did not. If anything, it got worse because spring brought money into Halcyon Wells, and money made Teague want to look finer than he was. Cattle buyers came through, men with good boots and fat pocketbooks, up from Denver and down from the railheads, and Teague wanted the Silver Garter to look like a place such men belonged. A ragged piano player in a torn ash gray coat did not fit the picture Teague was trying to sell. It came to a head on a Saturday. The same crowded floor, the same 50 men, and a cattle buyer's party in the corner, silk hats and cigars, spending like the money would spoil if they kept it. One of them, a big man with a gold watch chain, called Teague over and said something behind his hand, and jerked his chin at the piano. Teague nodded, quick and eager, the way a man nods when a richer man tells him what to do. He crossed the floor. He grabbed Dell by the collar of that coat, mid-song, and hauled him up off the bench. "On your feet, Tramp. Paying gentlemen don't care to look at you." And he marched Dell toward the door, in front of the whole Saturday floor. 50 men, and the cattle buyers laughing, and Teague playing the big man for their benefit. He shoved Dell out through the front doors, out onto the boardwalk, and then off the boardwalk into the street, into the churned spring mud. And he threw the coat out after him, and it landed in the muck. Royce Pemberton saw his chance to shine. Nora was near the door with a tray, and Royce had been courting her for weeks, in his way thinking a girl in debt was a girl he could climb over. He wanted her to see him be a man. So he grabbed the tip jar off the top of the piano, the little jar with Dell's few pennies in it, and he carried it to the door and tipped it out into the mud beside the fallen man. "There's your wages, orchestra," Royce said, loud, so Nora would hear. "Busk in the mud where you belong." The pennies sank into the muck. The whole floor was watching now, half of them laughing. And here is what Dell did. He did not curse. He did not swing. He did not scrabble after the pennies. He got to his knees in the cold spring mud, and he reached past the coins, and he picked up the coat. He gathered it to his chest with both arms, wet and filthy as it was, and he held it like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. The town saw a broken man clutching a rag. But you know better now. You know there's something sewn near the heart of that coat. You know it's the one thing he came with. So you watched him choose it over the money, over his pride, over everything, and you understood, even if not one soul on that Saturday floor did. That coat is worth more than every coin in the room. And so, though nobody said it yet, is the man wearing it. Nora put down her tray. She didn't care who was watching. She went out the front door, past Royce, into the street, and she helped Dell to his feet. And she didn't say a word to him about it, because there were no words that would fix it. Royce called her name. She didn't turn around. That was the night Royce Pemberton lost her, though he was too proud to know it, and would go on thinking she was his to win for a long time yet. Dell didn't sleep that night. He rarely did. When the town went dark, he walked, and his walking always took him to the same place, the depot. He'd sit on the platform in the dark and the quiet, where the only sound was the wind and the rails ticking as they cooled, and something in him settled there that settled nowhere else. He couldn't have told you why. He never could tell you why about anything to do with before. Before was a locked door in his own head, and he'd stopped trying the handle years ago. Nora found him there after midnight. She'd worried herself out of sleep and gone looking, and there he was on the platform bench, and he was doing something strange. He was tapping out a tune with 2 fingers on the flat board of the bench. No piano. Just his hand on the wood, and his lips moving, humming so soft she could barely catch it. A waltz. The same private waltz he played to the empty room every night at closing. Slow and sweet and sad. a tune that didn't belong in a saloon at all. "That song," Nora said, sitting down beside him. "You play it every night. What is it?" Del kept tapping, slow. "I don't know," he said. "I don't remember learning it. I don't remember ever not knowing it. It's just always been in my hands." He looked at his own fingers like they belonged to somebody else. "Sometimes I think somebody used to play it for me. When I was small. But I can't see who. It's like reaching into water for something on the bottom, and your fingers just stir the mud." Water, that word again. Nora had heard him use it before, when the noon whistle blew. She looked at him in the thin moonlight, and she really looked, the way the town never did. And she saw two things she'd never let herself notice. The first was his wrist. His sleeve had ridden up, and around his wrist ran an old scar, a pale ring in the skin, the kind of mark a rope leaves, or a strap. Something that had held him hard once, and torn as it held. Not a fresh hurt, an old one, years old, grown over. "Del," she said quietly, "that scar, round your wrist." He pulled the sleeve down, quick, the same way he clutched the coat. "Don't know," he said. "Had it as long as I can remember. Longer than the song, maybe, and the trains," she said. "At noon. Every day your hands shake when that whistle crosses the gorge. I've watched you 2 winters. Why the gorge, Del? Why noon?" He was quiet a long time. The rails ticked. The stray dog had followed her down and now lay across his boots, and he reached down and scratched its torn ear, and it seemed to give him the nerve to talk. "I remember cold water," he said at last. "That's the first thing I've got, not before it. Just cold water. All around, over my head, and no air. And a man's coat over my face. Somebody holding me up out of the water by a fistful of coat, and shouting, and the cold, and then nothing till a bunkhouse in Wyoming 2 years on, where a section crew said they'd found me half drowned down a gorge and raised me on the line. No name that anybody knew, so they called me Del, after a fella who died, and I've been Del ever since." He shrugged, like it was nothing, like he was telling her the weather. "When the whistle crosses the gorge here, something in me remembers the falling. That's all. It don't mean anything. A lot of men have got no past. I'm just one more." He believed that. That was the terrible thing. He believed, all the way down, that he was nobody. A boy the line pulled out of a river and named after a dead man, so he never asked who he was before the water. Why would you go looking for a name when you've decided you never had one? But you were listening, weren't you? Cold water. A man's coat over his face. A gorge. A scar like a torn strap on his wrist. And 11 years ago, at a place called Placer Gorge, in the winter of '67, a trestle went down, and a little Halloran boy went into the river and was called drowned. You've got the pieces now. You're holding them all, and not one person in Halcyon Wells has put 2 of them together. Not even the man they belong to. Nora didn't have the Denver paper's story sharp enough in her mind yet to make the whole picture. But she had enough to know one thing for certain. This man was not a tramp. Tramps didn't carry a lullaby in their hands they couldn't name. Tramps didn't guard a torn coat like a crown. Something had happened to Del. Something big enough to take his whole life away and leave only the shape of it. And the town had looked at the ash-gray coat and decided the man inside it was trash. She decided, sitting on that cold platform, that she was done letting them run him off. Teague was itching to be rid of him now. She could feel it, now that fine folks were coming through. One more Saturday like the last, and Del would be on a freight car out of town with nothing. She wasn't going to let it happen. So, she did something about it. Ma Pruitt ran the depot lunchroom, a little eating house right on the platform where travelers waited for the trains, and in the corner of it sat a battered old upright piano nobody could play. Nora knew Ma Pruitt had been wanting music to draw the waiting passengers, to sell them another cup of coffee while they listened. Nora made the case. A real player, she said, best you ever heard, and honest and cheap, and he'd bring the travelers in. Ma Pruitt was no fool about money. She said if he was half as good as Nora claimed, she'd pay him a fair wage and feed him hot dinners, and that was that. It seemed like a small kindness, a seat at a better piano, a fair wage, hot food. Nora meant it as nothing more than getting Dell out from under Teague's boot. But look where she put him. She put him at the depot. She sat him down at a piano not 30 feet from the tracks, on the very platform where the noon trains stopped every single day. She took the man the whole world had lost, and without knowing it, she set him down in the one spot in all of Colorado where the world was most likely to find him. The lost heir, playing his mother's lullaby, right where the trains come in. Dell started at the lunchroom that week, and something eased in him, just a little. Ma Pruitt was gruff but fair. The food was hot. The travelers liked the music, and they'd leave a coin in a cup that was his to keep. All of it. No ledger, no Teague. He played the tunes folks wanted in the daytime. But at the quiet hour, before the noon train, when the lunchroom was near empty, his hands would drift, the way they always did, into the waltz. The lullaby he couldn't name. It carried through the thin plank wall and out onto the platform, out over the tracks, soft and sad and strange. He didn't know he was ringing a bell. He didn't know that somewhere east, a very old man was counting down the last days of a 30-day clock, and that a bell like this one was the only thing in the world that old man was praying to hear. Winter still had a grip, even into spring, and one cold evening Nora came to the lunchroom after her shift at the Garter and found Dell closing up. The tear in his coat had spread. It gaped now, shoulder to waist, and the wind came off the mountains sharp as ever. She'd brought her needle and thread. She'd been carrying them for weeks. "Waiting, Dell," she said. "It's near froze out. Let me close that seam. Just the seam. I won't touch anything else. You'll die of the cold before spring's done, and then who plays my sad songs?" And this time, he didn't refuse. Maybe it was the depot easing him. Maybe it was that she'd fed him when it cost her, and helped him up out of the mud and never once called him a tramp. Maybe he was just tired, and cold, and for once in 11 years he let somebody near the one thing he guarded. He shrugged the coat off his shoulders and handed it to her, slow, like handing over a piece of himself. "Just the seam," he said. "Just the seam." She sat down by the lamp and spread the coat across her lap and began to work, and her needle, following the torn lining down toward the heart, caught on something. Something the tear had loosened. Something small and hard, sewn down into the wool where she'd glimpsed it that first cold night 2 winters ago. She worked it free with her fingers, and she held it up to the lamp. It was a medallion. Small, no bigger than a coat button, but heavy and finely made, enameled in deep blue and gold, worn smooth by years against the wool. And the shape of it, when the lamplight caught it, was unmistakable. It was a locomotive. A little enameled steam engine, wrought in careful detail, the kind of thing no poor man ever owned, the kind of thing that was made in a jeweler's shop for a purpose. And along the base of it, almost worn away but not quite, were letters, initials, and a mark, the sort of founder's stamp a great company presses onto a thing it means to last. Nora's breath caught. She turned it over in her palm. She didn't know the whole of what it was, but she knew a rich man's mark when she saw one, and she knew this had been sewn into the heart of an ash-gray coat for 11 years, riding into every insult, every bowl of cold stew, every night in the mud. She looked up at Dell, and her hands were shaking now, not from the cold. "Dell," she whispered, "do you know what this is? Do you know what was sewn into your coat?" He came and looked at it in her hand. And his face, in the lamplight, held not one flicker of greed, not one spark of scheming. He looked at the little blue and gold engine like it was a stone off the road. He didn't know it. He didn't remember it. He didn't reach for it or ask what it might fetch. He only frowned, gently, the way a man frowns at a dream he can almost catch. And then he shook his head. "No," he said. "I don't know what it is. It's just always been there." He looked at it a moment longer, that little locomotive glinting on Nora's palm, worth more than the whole town of Halcyon Wells and every soul in it, and then he did the last thing on earth a scheming man would do. He closed her fingers over it, and he handed it back, and he said the words that would break your heart if you're the one holding all the pieces. "Put it back where it belongs, Nora. Sew it back into the coat. Whatever it is, it's mine. It came with me out of the water. I'd like to keep it near where it's always been." That was all. No plan, no claim. No idea that the small, hard thing in his coat was a key that fit a lock worth $1.5 million, a key 11 years lost, a key that could name him before the whole world. He just wanted it sewn back over his heart, because it was the one thing he'd come into this life with, and a man holds on to the one thing he's got. Nora looked at the little engine. She looked at Dell. And out beyond the thin plank wall, in the cold dark, the rails began to tick and sing the way they do when a train is still miles off but coming. She didn't know yet what she was holding, but she knew it was everything. She threaded her needle, and with the depot lamp burning low and the noon train one more sleep away, she began, stitch by careful stitch, to sew the founder's mark of the Halcyon Pacific Railroad back into the coat of the man the town had swept out with the mud. Neither of them heard the eastbound come in early that night. Neither of them saw the tall stranger step down onto the far end of the platform, a man in a gray duster with careful eyes, a man who had been 3 days in Halcyon Wells asking quiet questions about a boy pulled from a gorge 11 years gone. A man who had almost given up on this little town. A man who, just then, tilted his head toward the lunchroom wall. Because through it, faint and sweet and impossible, he'd heard the first few bars of a waltz he'd been told to listen for. A lullaby only one lost child in all the world could know. He stopped on the step. And he did not get back on the train. The stranger stood on that step a long while. The train breathed behind him. The conductor called, and called again, and finally the eastbound pulled out without him, its red lamp shrinking down the line toward the gorge. He did not watch it go. He was listening to a plank wall and a battered upright, and a waltz played soft for no one at all. His name was Aldous. He had come a long way to hear it. For 3 days he had walked Halcyon Wells with careful eyes and quiet questions. He had bought coffee he did not drink. He had asked the depot men, the freight clerks, the old hands who remembered the year the trestle went down. A boy, he said, pulled from Placer Gorge in the fall of '67. Half drowned. No people, no name. Would any man here recall such a thing? Most just shook their heads. 67 was a long way back. 11 years is a lot of winters to hold a stranger's face. Aldous had nearly given it up. He had booked his seat east and settled his hotel bill and told himself the trail had gone cold in this mud and timber town like it had gone cold in a dozen others. His employer was an old man now, and an old man's patience runs short when a clock is running. 30 days. That was all the paper allowed. 30 days. And then a fortune slid out of a family's hands forever. Then he stepped down for one last look at the water, and a wall started to sing. He did not go in that night. A careful man does not. He went back to his room, and he lay awake, and in the morning he did what careful men do. He asked around about the piano player at the lunchroom. The answers came easy, and every one of them was wrong. "That Tramp?" said the man at the livery, and laughed. "Dell, come off a freight 2 winters ago with nothing but a bad coat. Plays for stew. You don't want him, mister. You want respectable folk." At the Silver Garter, Ambrose Teague heard the stranger's questions, and something greedy woke behind his eyes. He was quick, Teague. He smelled money the way a dog smells meat under a floorboard. But he could not yet see the shape of it, so he lied on instinct to keep his cards close. "No such boy here," Teague said, wiping a glass he had already dried. "Gorge boy?" "Drowned boys stay drowned, friend, now. If it's a sound investment you're after, I own the finest establishment in 3 counties. And he steered the talk to the deed of the Silver Garter. To land. To himself. He never once said the name Dell. Royce Pemberton, silk vest and borrowed manners, was worse. He heard a rich man's agent was asking questions, and he arranged to be found. He walked Aldous down Main Street and named him the banker, the assay chief, the mine owner's cousin. He named every man in Halcyon Wells with a clean collar and a bank account. He walked the stranger right past the depot lunchroom and never turned his head. Inside, not 20 feet off, a man in an ash-gray coat wiped his hands clean and sat down to play. That is the cruelty of it, and the beauty. The answer was sweeping the floor the whole time. It carried plates. It split its supper with a stray dog at the back step. The whole town had walked past it for 2 winters, calling it a tramp, and here came a careful man with the truth in his pocket. And even he was being led away from it by fools who thought worth was a matter of tailoring. Aldous almost got on the next train. He stood on the platform with his ticket and his gray duster and his tired eyes, and he thought, this town is another dead end. And through the plank wall came the waltz. He knew it the way you know your own mother's voice across a crowded room. He had been made to learn it. Sung it back to the old man 100 times so there'd be no mistaking. It was a lullaby, and it belonged to one family in all the world and one lost child. Aldous put his ticket back in his vest. He walked to the lunchroom door. And he did not go in and grab the man and shout. He was too careful for that, and he had learned that hope is a thing you handle gently. He only stood in the doorway of Ma Pruitt's little room and watched the piano player finish the tune with his eyes half shut, the way a man plays a thing his hands know better than his mind does. Then Aldous went and sent a telegram. 2 words to a private car, sitting on a siding 40 miles east, waiting on him like a stone in a boot. Found him. Come, word travels fast in a small town, and secrets travel faster. Teague heard about the telegram before the wire had cooled. A depot boy told him for the price of a beer. And Teague put the pieces together the way a card sharp counts a deck. A rich man's agent. A missing heir. A fortune in the wind. And that stranger, sniffing around the piano player. Teague did not for 1 minute believe Dell was anybody. But he believed money, and he believed a story worth money was a story he wanted to own. And a tramp piano player, muddy and nameless, only muddied a clean claim. If there was reward in this, if there was leverage, Teague meant to be the man holding the pieces when the rich folk came. Not some drifter who'd blab and spoil it. So Ambrose Teague did the thing that would ruin him. He decided to run Dell out of town. He did it clever, the way he did everything. He went to Nora that same evening, where she stood at the wash tubs with her hands red to the wrist and her father's cough sounding through the thin wall of the room out back. "Nora," Teague said. All warmth, and it was warmth that frightened her more than his shouting ever had. "I've been thinking on your situation. Your father's doctor's bills. That debt you carry against your wages. It's a heavy load for a young woman." She said nothing. You learn, working for a man like that silence is safer than any answer. "I'm going to clear it," Teague said. "All of it. Your father's fees, the ledger, every cent. Wiped clean. You'll owe me nothing." For a moment her heart leapt, because she was tired and she was young, and a way out is a way out. Then she saw his eyes, and she knew the price would be steep, and it would not be money. Why? She said. Because I need a small favor, Teague said. That piano tramp. Dell, he's been trouble, bad for business. I want him gone. On the Dawn freight, out of the county, and not back. And I want you to tell him to go. He'll listen to you. He listens to nobody else. Teague smiled. You tell him it's for his own good. And your father sleeps easy, with a real doctor and no debt hanging over either of you. There it was. The whole ledger of her life laid on the bar. Her sick father on one side. On the other, the only man in Halcyon Wells who had ever thanked her for a kindness. She thought of Dell at the depot in the dark, playing a waltz with 2 fingers on a benchboard. She thought of the little enameled engine she had sewn back over his heart not 2 nights past, and how her hands had known it was everything even when her head did not. No, Nora said. Teague's warmth went out like a snuffed lamp. Then the debt stands. And it grows. You'll die owing me, girl. You and your father both. He straightened his cuffs. Suit yourself. Royce is seeing to the tramp regardless. Dawn freight. I only offered you the mercy of doing it kind. Now it'll be done cruel. He walked back into his saloon. Behind him, Nora stood at the washtub with the steam rising, and for the first time in a long time she let herself cry, quiet, so her father wouldn't hear. They came for Dell before light. Royce Pemberton enjoyed it. He brought 2 men from the saloon, and he stood in the cold with his hands in his good coat, and he told the piano player he had until the Dawn freight to be gone. County doesn't want you, Royce said. Mister, Teague doesn't want you. Nobody wants you, Dell. You had a good run, playing for scraps. Time to ride the rails again where you belong. Dell did not argue. He never argued. That was the thing about him the town had always mistaken for weakness. He went into the little back room off Ma Pruitt's lunchroom where he'd been let to sleep, and he took his few things, which were almost none. And he took the coat. He put the ash-gray coat on over his shoulders in the cold, and his hand went once to the breast of it, to the small, hard place sewn over his heart. The way a man will touch the one thing he owns to make sure it's still there. The little tuning wrench was in the pocket. The medallion he did not understand was against his chest. That was all he had in the world, and it was enough to hold on to. Nora ran down to the depot when she heard. She caught his sleeve on the cold platform, the both of them breathing steam. Don't go, she said. Dell, please, there's something. I don't know how to say it. That thing in your coat. The man who came off the train. I think you're... She stopped, because she did not have the words for a thing that big, and because it sounded like a fairy tale even in her own mouth. I think you might be somebody. Dell looked at her, and he smiled the tired, gentle smile that had kept him whole through 2 winters of mud. I'm nobody, Nora, he said. I've always been nobody. That's all right. Nobody's an easy thing to be. You just keep your head down, and you play the song, and you don't let it turn you mean. He touched her hand where it held his sleeve. You were kind to me. Better than 50 men in that saloon. And you were the one soul who called me by a name. I won't forget it. Wherever the rails take me. The Dawn freight's whistle came across the gorge, and Dell flinched, the old flinch, the noon train shudder that came at any whistle near that water, though he had never once told a soul why. Cold water and a man's coat over his face. Nothing before it. 11 years of nothing. The freight's north, Royce called from the platform edge, pleased with himself. Get on it. But the freight did not come first. Down the line, from the east, another whistle answered. Longer, deeper, a big engine, and behind it, catching the first gray light, a private car of dark green and gold with a brass rail on the platform, the kind of car a man builds when he owns the rails it rides on. The Halcyon Pacific's own car slowed at Halcyon Wells that had never rated a stop, and rolled to a hiss and a stand right there at the little depot, and the whole town that had gathered to see a tramp run off found itself gathered instead to gawk at railroad money. The door of the green car opened. And down the steps, slow, one hand on the brass rail, came an old man in a black coat. 68 years old, and every one of them in his face. And the face was hard the way stone is hard, worn, but not soft. Cornelius Halloran, the richest man west of Chicago. The railroad king, come in person to a mud town he'd never heard of a week ago, because a careful man had sent him 2 words. The mayor was there, of course, in his Sunday coat, hurrying forward with his hand already out and his speech already half-spoken. Cornelius Halloran did not so much as look at him. Because through the plank wall of the lunchroom, where Ma Pruitt had gone in early to light the stove and had asked the piano man to play her something before he left, soft and low, came the waltz. The old man went still. Every line of him. And then he walked. Past the mayor with his open hand, past Royce Pemberton in his silk vest, past Ambrose Teague, who had come running at the sight of the private car and now stood frozen with his mouth working. Past all of them, following the tune like a man following a rope hand over hand out of deep water, he walked into Ma Pruitt's depot lunchroom, and the whole town crowded the windows and the door to see. Dell was at the battered upright in the corner, coat on, bag by his feet, playing the waltz one last time in the town that was throwing him out. He did not hear the old man come in. His eyes were half shut, the way they always were when his hands played a thing his mind had lost. Cornelius Halloran crossed the little room. He stopped behind the piano. He set one hand, heavy and trembling just faintly, on the shoulder of the ash-gray coat. Dell's hands stopped on the keys. And the old man spoke, loud enough that every soul packed into that doorway and pressed to those windows heard every word. "That coat," Cornelius Halloran said, "that they've had you sweeping floors in, is worth more than this whole town. And so is the man wearing it." The room did not breathe. Dell turned on the piano stool and looked up at a stranger, an old rich man with wet eyes, and he did not understand any of it. "Sir," he said, "gentle, I think you've got the wrong." "Give me your hand," the old man said, and whether it was the weight of that voice or something older than either of them, Dell gave it. The old man turned the young man's wrist over in his 2 hands, into the light from the window. And there, ringing the wrist, was the scar. The old scar, like a rope or a strap had once bound him, worn pale by 11 years. Cornelius Halloran made a sound that was not quite a word. He pressed his thumb to that scar, gentle as a father. "They tied you to the section man's back," he whispered, "when they carried you up from the water. So you wouldn't slip. The scars from the strap." His voice broke clean in half. "I read the account 100 times. I never let myself believe it. 11 years. He looked into the young man's face, searching it, and what he found there made the hard stone of him crumble. "Julian," said the railroad king, "your name is Julian. You're my grandson. And I have been hunting for you across half this country for 11 years. The name landed in the room like a stone in a still pond. Dell, Julian, sat very still, and something moved behind his eyes, some far drowned thing stirring under 11 years of cold water. He did not remember. But he did not remember, either. His mouth opened, and nothing came out. Into that silence stepped the man in the gray duster. Aldous, he came through the crowd with a leather folio under his arm, and he opened it on the lunchroom counter among the coffee cups, and he laid out papers with seals and signatures, papers that had ridden 40 miles in that green car waiting for this morning. "The trust of the Halloran Pacific Railroad," Aldous said, and his careful voice carried. "Placer Gorge trestle collapse, autumn of 67. Passenger car went into the water. The founder's son and his wife were lost. Their boy, Julian Halloran, 4 years old, was never recovered. Presumed drowned." He looked at Dell. "Presumed for 11 years. Prove it," said a voice from the doorway, and it was Teague, because a drowning man grabs at anything, and Teague could feel a fortune he'd meant to own sliding into another man's hands. Any tramp can have a scar. Any tramp can pick up a tune. You'll not tell me this floor sweeper is. The tune, Cornelius Halloran said, and he did not raise his voice, is a lullaby his mother played on the piano in the parlor car. She played it every night of that child's life. It was never written down. It was never sold on a sheet in any music hall. It lived in one house and one child's ear, and it went into the gorge with her. The old man's eyes did not leave Dell's face. There is not a soul alive who could play that waltz but the boy who was rocked to sleep by it, and I have just heard him play it through a plank wall in a mud-town depot, note for note, the way I have heard it in my dreams for 11 years. Then he reached out, slow, and he laid his hand flat over the breast of the ash-gray coat. Over the heart. Over the small, hard place. And there's the last of it, he said. May I? Dell, who had asked a barmaid to sew this same thing back not 2 nights before, because it was the one thing he'd come into the world with, Dell nodded, because he could not have spoken if his life hung on it. Nora had done fine work. It took Aldous' little knife a moment to part the careful stitches over the heart of the coat, and out came the small enameled medallion, blue and gold, shaped like a locomotive, the founder's mark, the initials worn but there for any man to read. Cornelius Halloran drew out his watch. On the chain hung its twin. Same blue, same gold, same little engine, same mark. He held them up together in the window light, side by side, for the whole packed doorway to see. One was struck for me, the old man said. One for each blood heir of the line. His father wore this one. And when the water took the father, it should have taken this with him. Instead, some section man with a good heart cut it off the drowned man and pinned it inside the coat he wrapped around a half-dead child. And that child carried it through 11 years and 100 cold nights, and never sold it, though selling it would have bought him a winter's warmth a dozen times over. His voice thickened. Never sold it. Because a man holds on to the one thing he's got. He closed Dell's fingers around the little engine. Not a tramp, Cornelius Halloran said, and now he turned, slow, and let his eyes move across the crowd in the doorway, across Teague, across Royce, across all the faces that had watched a man swept out with the mud for 2 winters. Not a nobody. The lost Placer Gorge boy. The last of the Hallorans. Sole heir to the whole of the Halloran Pacific Railroad. $1.4 million. He let it hang. Found, gentlemen, with 3 days left on the clock. 30 days the paper had allowed. 27 were spent, and a careful man had stopped on a train step in the nick of time because a plank wall had started to sing. For a moment, nobody in that doorway could speak at all. Then the reckoning came, and it came slow, and it came in layers, and each man got exactly what he had earned. They walked back up to the Silver Garter, the whole town flowing along, because a thing like this could not stay in a lunchroom. And it happened, by the plain justice of it, before the very same Saturday floor that had watched Ambrose Teague dump a man in the street. Better than 50 men had laughed that day. Now they packed the saloon again, and nobody was laughing. The king had brought his lawyer down from the green car, a spare gray man with a satchel, and that lawyer asked, mild as milk, to see the ledger of the Silver Garter. And the deed. Teague blustered. Teague always blustered. You've no right, the deed's mine, free and clear. This is my house. The lawyer turned pages. He was in no hurry. And then he looked up, mild still, and he said, Mr. Teague, this deed shows the Silver Garter's land runs across the North Spur. Were you aware the North Spur, and the right-of-way beneath this very building, is held by the Halloran Pacific Railroad? A pause. You've been leasing the ground you stand on from the man whose grandson you had just ordered run out of the county on the Dawn freight. The color went out of Ambrose Teague like wine out of a tipped glass. He had spent 2 winters certain a man's worth was stamped on his coat. He had paid Dell last and least and public. He had thrown him in the mud to please a cattle buyer. He had schemed to run him off so he could sell a stranger's story for a reward, and every rung of it had been built on ground the boy's own family owned. Teague did not shout. There was nothing left to shout with. He began, of all things, to bow, little bobbing bows, hat in his hands, to the piano player he'd fed cold stew. Mr. Halloran, sir, Julian, if I may, there's been a misunderstanding, a terrible. I always treated the boy fair. Ask anyone. Nobody said a word to help him. The 50 men just watched him fold. Royce Pemberton tried a different tack, because Royce always had a tack. He came forward with his silk vest and his best smile, and his hand out. Julian. Old friend. Why, I always said there was quality in you. Didn't I say it, Nora? And he reached, easy, familiar, to take Nora Kilbride's arm the way he'd been taking it for months, staking his claim before the whole room. Nora took her arm back. She did it plain. No speech. She just stepped clear of his hand and moved to stand near Dell, near Julian, near the man she'd fed with her own 2 bits when she couldn't spare it, and she let the space between herself and Royce say the whole thing. Royce's smile hung on his face a second too long, and then it curdled. He had never really had her. He had only had a barmaid too tired, and too indebted to send him off. The fortune had not changed that. It had only turned the lamp up bright enough for the whole room to see what had always been true. And Julian, Dell still, in his heart, and maybe always, Julian did not gloat. That is the thing that finished the room. He did not strike a blow. He did not throw a single word back at the men who had thrown so many at him. He looked at Teague bobbing his bows, and at Royce with his curdled smile, and he felt no triumph in it at all. Only tired. He turned instead to the 2 who had been kind. The stray dog had followed the crowd up from the depot and stood in the sawdust wagging, and Julian knelt and scratched its ragged ears the way he had every night for 2 winters, splitting his stew. You never once cared what my coat was worth, he told it, and the room heard him, and the room was ashamed. Then he stood, and he looked at Nora. And you, he said. You called me by my name when I didn't have one. You spent money you didn't have on a supper for a man everyone else was glad to see go hungry. He shook his head, slow. You want to know who the quality was in this town? All along? It wasn't the man with the silk vest. It wasn't the man who owned the deed. It was the girl doing the wash. He turned to his grandfather then, the railroad king, the old man watching all of this with wet eyes and something like pride breaking over the stone of his face. Grandfather, Julian said, trying the word out, and it fit stranger and sweeter than he'd have believed. You said you'd lift me up. I'll not be lifted alone. He took Nora's hand. Her father's sick. There's a doctor's bill she's been carrying. Honest and real. And on top of it, every false debt this man, he did not even look at Teague, stitched onto her wages to keep her under his thumb. I want it struck. All of it. Paid. Tonight, out of my own hand, before it's even mine to give, and I want her father seen by the best physician the Halloran Pacific can send for. The lawyer was already writing, and Nora, Julian said, and here his voice went quiet, so the whole room had to lean in to hear the plainest thing said in Halcyon Wells in 100 years. I'm going to have to learn a railroad I don't know the first thing about. A whole line my grandfather built with his 2 hands. I can't do it alone. And I don't want to. There's a place at my side if you'll take it. Not out of debt, not out of pity, not a bargain of any kind. I'm asking because you were kind to me when it cost you everything, and a man remembers who was good to him in the mud. He almost smiled. Will you learn it with me? Nora Kilbride, 24 years old, red-handed from a lifetime of other people's wash, looked at the tramp she had fed and found he had never been a tramp at all. And she did the bravest and simplest thing of her life. She said yes. And the room, that same 50 and better men who had watched a piano man thrown in the street, broke into a sound like a wave. Because there is nothing a hard town loves so much, in the end, as watching the mud it stepped on turn out to be gold. Autumn came to Halcyon Wells. The Silver Garter had a new piano, tuned bright, and above the bar Teague had nailed a little sign, because Teague could read the wind, and the sign said, "No man in this house is judged by his coat." He kept it there. It was good for business, and Teague understood business if he understood nothing else. Twice a season he tipped his hat too low to the man who'd once played there for stew, and he'd say, to anyone who'd listen, always said the boy had clean hands. Always said it. No one who'd been there that Saturday ever agreed with him out loud. Royce Pemberton did not stay to see the leaves turn. He went east on a fare he borrowed and never repaid, silk vest and all, off to some other town where a man might mistake his contempt for one more time before that lamp got turned up bright too. Nora Kilbride ran the depot lunchroom now, the one she used to carry plates in. She'd bought it from Ma Pruitt fair and square, and she kept the battered upright in the corner just where it had always stood, and she would not let anyone tune away its little limp of a wrong note, because that note had sung a king off a train. Her father lived in a good house up the hill, with a real physician calling twice a week, and his cough had eased, and he had met the young man his daughter was learning a railroad beside, and he approved. Julian Halloran rode the line his grandfather built. He was learning it, mile by mile, the way he'd learned everything, quiet and clean-handed and slow to speak. But the Halloran Pacific stopped now at Halcyon Wells that had never rated a stop, every single day, at noon. And every noon Julian stepped down onto the boards of that little depot, and Nora came out from the lunchroom wiping her hands, and the two of them stood a while in the autumn light and watched the trains. And the whistle came across Placer Gorge, the same whistle that had shaken his hands every noon for 2 winters, the water that had taken his mother and his father and his name. His hands did not shake anymore. He'd go into the lunchroom some afternoons and sit at that battered upright with its wrong note, and he'd play the waltz his mother had left him, the only thing besides a coat and a medallion he'd carried out of the cold water. Only now he knew whose song it was. Now he played it, not for an empty room at closing, but for a girl doing accounts at the corner table, who looked up every time, every single time, because it was the sweetest sound she knew. The town had looked at the coat for 2 winters. It never once looked at the man. That's the whole of it, friends. The tramp was the heir, the barmaid was the treasure, and the men who judged a soul by the cut of his coat lived to bow to it. Some stories you carry a long way before you find out what they're worth. Some men, too. Tell me the town you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this one travels.